Welcome to a very special episode of Coffee with our Researchers as we mark a very important date on our calendar. It's Yom Ha'atzmaut. I'm Galit Solomon, Director of Marketing and Communications with Ben-Gurion University Canada, also known as BGU Canada. And joining us for today's episode is Professor Paula Kabalo, the former director of the Ben-Gurion Research Institute for the Study of Israel and Zionism at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. Since 2017, she has been the founding head of the Israeli Center for Israel Studies at the Institute, which is a complex of research hubs that aim to decode core themes related to Israel and Zionism. Among her many accolades, Professor Kabalo was invited to consult on the documentary Ben-Gurion Epilogue. She is also a member of the steering committee for the Ben-Gurion Archives exhibit hall, currently under construction. And also with us for this special chat are Simon Bensimon, Executive Director of Ben-Gurion University Canada in Montreal and Ottawa, and David Berson, our Executive Director in Vancouver. Simon has been working in Israel diaspora positions for 35 years now, and David lived in Israel for 2 decades. Both of them are keen students of Israel. A few words about Coffee with our Researchers, led by our executive directors. The segment gives us an opportunity to sit down with BGU researchers for a casual conversation over coffee or tea to learn about a hot topic coming out of the university. And on that note, I would like to hand things over to Simon and David. Take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you, Galit. Chag Sameach, Paula, nice to see you.
Chag Sameach.
And what we'd like to do today with you is a little bit of a game we came up with, which we are calling, what would Ben-Gurion think if he was here today, starting the 75th year of Israeli independence. And we divided up into some of the main themes of what Israel is dealing with today. And we're going to start with Israeli society. As a Zionist, Ben-Gurion was a strong believer in kibbutz galuyot, the ingathering of the exiles, which we see is a dream come true in Israel in many, many ways and continues in light of the war in Ukraine more recently. But what would he think of Israeli society, of Israeli culture, the Hebrew language, ethnic and religious diversity and some of the challenges, some what people call the Americanization of Israeli society and media? What would he think of social media? And of course, what would he think today of the relations and integration of the Arab community in Israel?
Okay, I mean, we can spend the whole hour and a half just talking about this, right?
Right.
Let me start by saying, Simon, that I've been asked many times in my life what Ben-Gurion would have said about something. And when I was younger, I would hesitate and I would say, I don't know. I can't talk on his behalf. And now for some reason, I feel comfortable. If I'm asked, I answer. But we all know that it's my version, right? It's my interpretation of Ben-Gurion. So I'm taking the liberty to answer on his behalf, but it's my version. So if you want other people's versions, you have to go to other people.
Absolutely.
So maybe we'll start with the social media, because I think that's a lighter note, and I think it's interesting. In many ways, one would claim that Ben-Gurion invented, or Ben-Gurion was, let's say, he predicted it in the way he understood leadership. Because Ben-Gurion was a leader that believed in leadership as a result, as a consequence of leadership, followership, dialogue. He invested time and thought in connecting with the wider public. In fact, the wider public invested time and thought in communicating with him. They wrote him letters and they shared with him their thoughts. And the people that did that belonged to various strata of society inside Israel. People, men and women, young and old, people from the periphery, people from the center, people more educated, less educated, Jews and non-Jews. less Arabs, I have to say, but also still not only Jews communicated with him, and also people from the world, Jewish communities and non-Jewish communities around the world. People wrote letters to David Ben-Gurion, and the more he answered, the more they wrote. And he answered in person. He tried to, at least, or he attempted to. He didn't always cope with with the floods, with the flow of letters. However, his answers do resemble what today we would consider a social media, which is a direct communication between individuals and leadership. I would say that what does differ is that no one there today, I think some of the answers in social media probably are written on behalf of the leaders, as if the leaders are answering, but that's not the case with Ben-Gurion. When he was not answering, there was someone else answering and saying, unfortunately, Ben-Gurion cannot. It was very clear when he was answering or not. And also another thing that is unique about his social media attitude is that it was very personal and intimate. He wrote a letter to the person that wrote to him, knowing that that letter might go to the community or to the neighbors or to the family, but it wasn't out there in the media. So there was something direct and intimate and very personal. And the last thing I'll say about this is that, and that might be similar to today's attitude of leadership, that he did take into consideration what things that were told to him. I can see how ideas that were shared with him inculcated into his thought and then came out in other letters. So maybe that's the first answer.
It's very interesting because, you know, about a year ago, our colleague Jeff Kay, the Vice President for Public Affairs, discovered a letter that had been written by the principal of Beth Israel Synagogue Afternoon School here in Vancouver to Ben-Gurion, and the response was found. And we found the principal's daughter, and we made a copy of this letter, framed it, and gave it to her. I mean, so it happened, and it happened again, like you said, it was a conversation with the entire community. He wrote not only to the principal, but to the teachers and to all the students, and he, you know, spoke to them about what was the topic at hand.
And I can guess what the topic was in hand, but I think it might come up again when we talk about the connection with the Jewish communities around the world. So yeah, let's get back to that letter later on today, because I think it fits well into what we want, other things we want to talk about Ben-Gurion. So going back to society, to the bigger question about society, you know, Ben-Gurion belonged to an era in which multiculturalism wasn't really an option, or at least it clearly wasn't a favorable option. He believed that the success of Israel he really believed in the melting pot idea, or the way he called it, it was divided into two parts: kibbutz galuyot, meaning in gathering of the exiles, and mizug galuyot, which is integrating the exiles, right? So bringing Jews all over the world, from all over the world to Israel, and then making sure that these Jewish communities and these Jewish individuals integrate with each other. So when we look at the concept of integration, when Ben-Gurion and the way Ben-Gurion understood integration did include a part of giving up, one would even say perhaps erasing your previous identity. This does not mean, and people tend to be mistaken here, this does not mean that he thought that people shouldn't be proud of their legacies, or that they shouldn't preserve and study and respect their legacies, but he hoped that those legacies will become something of the past and will not be definers. They will not be so present in the way Israelis define themselves in the present. I mean, they will not remain as components of identity in the present. I think that in that sense, he would be surprised when he would see Israel today. He might also be disappointed, although I have to say that in this respect, I disagree with him. So I don't, unfortunately, if I would have a chance to meet with him, I would tell him that he got this one wrong, that people need to stick to their previous identities because it's a source of strength. And there is no contradiction between being an Argentinian Jew, let's say in my case, and still being a very strong Israeli. I mean, I'm very Israeli. So I'm an Israeli with an Argentinian Jewish roots, as my family members who are Israelis with Moroccan roots and Israelis with Tunisian Jews and roots and so on. Those roots are important they are an endless source of richness to our life, to our identity, and they are an endless source of richness to our Jewish identity. And I think that in Israel, even more so, because in Israel, the Israeliness is so strong that it sometimes threatens to take over Jewishness. And these roots from the previous world are Jewish roots that nurture us. They nurture the prayers and they nurture the habits and the rituals of the holidays. They're very important. So in that sense, I think Ben-Gurion would definitely be surprised and he might even be disappointed.
So Paula, let's close this segment with a few words on the Arab community.
Look, it's important to emphasize that Ben-Gurion really was less in we have to say it bluntly and frankly, that Ben-Gurion was less interested in the Arab community as a community, okay? He believed very much in the importance of individual Arab citizens to integrate and to do the best in Israeli society because he believed that this is a condition for Israel's thriving as a democratic society. But he was, he did not accept, he did not accept, or definitely he did not encourage the aims of Arab communities in Israel to preserve, let's say, collective national identities. And he was, but I think that more than that, it will be more accurate to say that he was less, he invested less time in that because he did not consider that being upper in his priorities. And if I'm hesitating here is because it's my impression. It's not that I'm completely sure about it, but when I look at his schedule, people say, he neglected the topic. I really think it's not just about neglecting the topic. I think it's about prioritizing. And prioritization was, his prioritization was for sure that Israel, that the Jewish majority in Israel has to find a way to get along with each other. Otherwise, we're doomed. He saw that as an existential thing. So from his understanding, let's first make sure that the integration of exile succeeds, because if that fails, nothing to talk about all the rest. So that's why the Arab condition in the country was less in his priority. Also, we should remember that the war of independence was still very close. So there was still a lot more suspicion. So that was not that did not hold an important place in his agenda. This is something definitely we can criticize Ben-Gurion for not paying enough attention. But to conclude that and trying to put it in the present, from the present day eyes, the fact that, so again, there's always the pros and the half full glass and the half empty glass, right? So maybe the half empty glass would be that there's still a long way to go. And that still the Arab minority in Israel still doesn't feel, generally speaking, fully integrated in Israeliness as Ben-Gurion would have liked. And as many of the founders of the state did predict in the Declaration of Independence. However, if you look at the hardcore data, right? Data, education, middle class, economic mobilization, encounters, social encounters, professional encounters between Jews and Arabs in Israel. This is just moving forward in a natural way. And I think that Israeli society is Jews and Arabs in Israel, Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs are finding new routes to create a joint Israeliness. And this is something that did not happen in the past and is happening more so in the present. And it's a good thing that I think the younger generation is succeeding in achieving more than the older generations did.
Great.
It's very interesting, Paula, because there are so many exigencies that existed, during the first decades of Israel's creation that caused Ben-Gurion and caused the society to prioritize things that today we look at and we say, goodness, how come we try to make everybody aspire to be a unified Israeli person as opposed to recognizing all the different cultures. And even though my next question is going to be about Israeli democracy, it makes me think, what would David Ben-Gurion say about the fact that President Chamovitz appointed our first vice president for diversity and inclusion, who's a Bedouin professor at Ben-Gurion University, right? And you look at what we're doing in the Negev today and the kind of it's a special ecosystem of everybody working together, which is almost its own small Israel. And I think that it's very interesting. And I wonder what he would say about that.
Well, clearly, as someone who, again, Ben-Gurion himself, one of the things that he believed was a condition for social mobilization was education. And in fact, there's a whole article that he wrote in the early 60s about higher education as something that the state is obliged to provide to everyone. And in fact, this article is included in the exhibition hall that we will be inaugurating in a month from today. We decided to include this article. You know how hard it was to choose Ben-Gurion's articles, but this is one of the articles that we decided to include. Now, as someone who talked in the early 60s about higher education, not high school education, university education, as something that is a condition for social integration in Israel, can you imagine Ben-Gurion visiting Ben-Gurion University and understanding that many of the professors that are now leading the top leading programs in all the fields come from such diverse backgrounds? Jews and Arabs, people who are first generation of education in their families. I want to say it's fascinating, but I think I have to say it's unbelievable, right? I think it's really something, it's a huge achievement. And I think that when Ben-Gurion wrote that article, my imagination is that people read that article and said, oh, well, here he goes again with his fantasies.
Big ideas.
Right? And it's less than, and he wrote it in the beginning of the 60s. And today, right, 60 years later, we're getting closer and closer to that. So yes, that's something you would be very happy about.
Yeah. And it's so cool when you speak about that, because I have, just over here on my shelf, a whole collection of Ben-Gurion's writings and books, including the exhibits that have been done before at BGU, right? What was it called? Hazaken David Ben-Gurion v'Moreshto, right? And I'm sorry, I'm going to do this again, but these are pictures of Ben-Gurion that I actually brought back with your permission from the archives, about probably 7-8 years ago. The Simon, should I ask the next question?
Please do, David.
Okay. So, Paula, one of the things that's very much à la perek, which is very contemporary right now, is the whole issue of Israel's democracy and the way that it's being set up. And, Ben-Gurion was a pragmatist, and he always wanted to make sure that things would work so that the country would, move forward. But we have a phenomenal electoral system in Israel, which is proportional representation. And one could describe that as being, every person has a vote, every person has a voice on one hand. And on the other hand, we just had a series of 4 elections. We have a government that's barely holding together. ostensibly, we could talk about there being a lot of political, instability. What do you think Ben-Gurion would say about that today?
Before I answer that, I want to say something about the photos that I gave you permission to take from the archives. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that these were photos that were done for an exhibition. They're not original, okay?
Right.
They were
Okay.
done for the exhibition. I think it was celebrating Ben-Gurion's 100 years of birth or something like that. And you were kind enough to offer to take them and preserve them in Canada. So it's a great honor for us, and I'm glad that you did that, David. So now we can talk about the elections.
Right.
Look, Ben-Gurion, any of us who studies Ben-Gurion knows that he hated the system. I will not use a better word than that, okay? I could say he disliked it. He thought it wasn't efficient. He could not stand the system. He believed that the proportional system was, well, he knew that the proportional system was something that was necessary when there was no sovereignty. Because when you do not have sovereignty, you want to make sure that you have the maximum representation of all the groups, because you need to have everyone in the game, right? Because you don't have sovereignty, so there's no such thing as what is coalition and opposition. You want to have the biggest coalition that you can gain, because you want because it's voluntary. There's not. I'll try to explain. I know I don't have much time, so I'll give it in 30 seconds. The whole idea of the proportional system that was developed in the World Zionist Organization was based on the assumption that since there's nothing obliges the people to be part of this political game, it's all voluntary. So in order for people to be willing to play the political game, they have to feel that they have a say about it. So you wanted to have as many groups and segments of the political spectrum inside the policy-making process, okay? That's why the proportional system fitted very well into the World Zionist Organization. One would also say, ironically or not, that it fits into the Jewish nature of having, all the famous jokes about, two Jews, three opinions, and all that, all those things, which of course are correct. Of course, they might be jokes, but it doesn't mean they're not reality. When the state was established, the first elections took place in the midst of a war. One has to understand that. You cannot start changing the rules of the game and playing a new political game while people, 10% of the population were mobilized. No, what am I saying? No, sorry. No, I said 10%. 20. You had 120,000 people mobilized, and you had 700,000 people or 750,000 people participating in the elections. But of course, I'm not including, overall. So a fifth of the people were mobilized, and that means that they were not living in their original counties or regions. Why is this important? Because Ben-Gurion wanted to adopt the British system, and the British system is based on regions. It divides the countries into geographical regions. But if you want to have a regional representation, you need people to be, as the primary condition, you need people to be living in their homes. But when you have around a fifth of the population living outside of their homes, of course you cannot do that. What do you do with the soldiers? What do you do with the internally displaced people? Oh, there was a mess. There was a war going on. So he said, okay, he gave up on that idea for the first elections. And then once you created a coalition or a political system that is based on this proportional system, then, okay, good luck with persuading all the smaller parties to give up on their proportional representation, because now they will lose from that. So from that moment on, he was playing a game, he was losing in the political battle of changing that system. Now, why did he dislike the system so badly? I will point out two reasons for that. One is the instability. Okay, yes, it does create instability because governments don't finish the 4 years because you have a party of 3 members and they are not happy with the decision and they vote against the government. The government falls down. So it's really hard to manage a country with this system. But that's not the only reason he disliked it. He used to say that this system reminds him of the Jews of the diaspora, and in the not good way, okay? In the way that Ben-Gurion disliked, meaning the splitting, the constant disagreement, the fact that there's no one center that people could all gather around, the endless nitty-gritty of being each tiny group trying to make it its own way. So for him, preserving that system was, in a way, a failure of Israeli sovereignty. That's how he saw it, and that's why he disliked it so badly. So he, in fact, when he retired for the first time, when he took a leave and came to Sde Boker, here, I'm showing you when he came to live here, in where I am, usually, where I live, he spent a whole year trying to persuade political rivals and mates to agree on the change, but it didn't work. It's one of his greatest political failures. Once you did it in the first elections, it was impossible to go back. And here we are.
He let the genie out of the bottle in many respects, really. But it's so interesting what you say about his perception of the diaspora and the way that the diaspora behaved. And then I think about this in present politics in the World Zionist Organization, for example, and the way that there's almost this forced sense of unity. And that I really can see how that comes directly out of a vision that he had about people getting along and working together, which is definitely very idealistic, but it was very much the vision of a nation builder.
Right.
Yeah, and in fact, when you look at the success of, if you look at the fact that Israel is, as Simon said, I mean, we're entering the 75th year, right? We're celebrating 74, but this means we're starting the 75th year. And Israel has many achievements. And one would say, if you compare Israel to other countries that were established 70 plus years ago, I mean, I think Israel has a lot to be proud of if it compares itself to countries that have the same age that it has. And I think that if we want to understand those sources of strength, they definitely go back to the World Zionist Organization and to its wise, it's not only the idea of unification and finding ways to bring people with different ideas together. It's not only let's say, the ideology and the vision, but it's also the practices, the practical methods that they use in order to ensure that actually can happen. You have to be also pragmatic. If you want a non-sovereign community to work in coordination, when you don't have police and you don't have army and you don't have law, and people just have to agree. And that was taking place for quite a long while, right? So, yeah.
Great.
So
good. So let's thank you. That was fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about the economy. So Ben-Gurion at the outset was a labor organizer, a union leader, Avodat Ivrit, organizing Jewish workers in Palestine. Israel has changed a lot from those days of a strong, centralized labor market economy to a much more capitalistic, open economy. What would he think today of on the good side, the startup nation, and on the more challenging side, the gaps between rich and poor in Israel?
The left behind nation.
yeah, well, maybe we should understand that, maybe just for the audience that is less familiar with Ben-Gurion, we should clarify that although he was the leader of the union, and we imagine him as this socialist, let's say, icon, but he always appreciated entrepreneurship very much, and he throughout the whole years that he was a political leader, and those were many years because he wasn't only a political leader when he was the prime minister, right? He was a political leader before that, as you mentioned. He didn't have a phase in his economic view that said no entrepreneurship, no private enterprise. He believed in private enterprise, and he believed that private enterprise is a demonstration of faith in the country. That's why he wanted so much. He encouraged so much private enterprise of Jews around the world in Israel. He didn't want Jews to invest in Israel only via philanthropy. He wanted Jewish communities to invest in Israel via economy, which is quite interesting because why would any businessman invest in Israel in the year 1951? But he expected that, right? He expected that will happen. So let's clarify that first, that we're not talking about a leader that did not believe in private enterprise. He definitely believed in private enterprise. And when you believe in private enterprise, you do believe in market competition, and you do believe in capitalism, and you do believe in the power of the market, which takes me, of course, to the conclusion that he would be very satisfied and happy to see the innovative industry, high technology industry that is taking place in Israel. Needless to say, the fact that it's happening in the Negev is almost, no, it's not almost, it's a dream come true, right, for him.
Yeah.
We'll get back to that, but let's talk about the, as you said, the challenging or the less successful or the non-successful parts of this. So we should remember, I think it's our commitment to Ben-Gurion to remember that he believed that it is the state's responsibility to make sure that every citizen receives the basics that that person needs. That what you call a safety network, right? A safety net. Okay, so Ben-Gurion was a great believer in a safety net, and he was a great believer in the state as the provider of that safety net. And I'm not going now into the details of how exactly the state is providing that through its own services or through supporting it via funding, or never mind how. Just the understanding that the state is a provider, is responsible for providing the safety net. That is something that Ben-Gurion believed in. And if we want to be I think faithful, or if we want to be respectful to Ben-Gurion's vision, we have to go to those topics. We have to make sure that we make things better in that respect all the time. Now, I do think that Israel is a compassionate society, I have to say. I do think that. I don't believe, I don't belong to those who say that Israel lost its compassion. I disagree with that. I think Israelis are compassionate. Israelis, as human beings, it's a compassionate society. And of course, one would say, yes, this is part of our Jewish legacy. And yes, it is. Or for the Arabs, this is part of the Muslim legacy and part of the Christian legacies. This is part of the, let's say, long-lasting legacies that people in Israel have beyond the last 74 plus years. But the state, but the state mechanisms have to. They do have a role there, and it is the role of the citizens to remind them all the time, and it's something that has to be out there in the public discourse constantly, as part of that constant dialogue between leaders and followers. And I guess that it relates to what to what you started with, Simon, when you said about the type of leadership that Ben-Gurion, when we mentioned the type of leadership that Ben-Gurion represented as someone that is listening to the public. So yes, this is something that we are committed to and we have to improve. Of course, there are different ways to reach that goal. Okay, there's still work to do. We have much more than 75 years ahead of us, right? This is something we have to maintain. Maybe a word about going back to Israel's achievements in the economic perspective. Then I would say that all this thing of startup nation, that we tend to look at it as something as a result of the 1990s, right? So again, if you read Ben-Gurion in the 1950s, and his correspondence with the engineer Zarchin about water desalination, he has and the way he responded to Tavor's ideas of solar energy. You know, Ben-Gurion is writing and is learning about solar energy and about water desalination in the early 50s. And he's talking about it as a solution to energy. He's talking about it as part of Israel's commitment to reinvent itself because of its scarce, the limitation of resources. As you can see in the photo behind me, the fact that Israel doesn't have water, the fact that it has, you know, the soil is very poor. And these are just two examples of Ben-Gurion talking about topics that are cutting edge today, you know, natural energies, things like that. So these are things that Israel is continuing his legacy without even knowing.
So just in the spirit of Yom Ha'atzmaut and Ben-Gurion, I want you to see that I actually have mounted in my office and have saved. This is a 50, it's a shekel. It was before the new shekels. And this is a picture of Ben-Gurion and his home, but also of the Negev. And I guess when I was living in Israel, they just took those out of circulation. I managed to get a whole bunch of new ones, but it's an amazing a photo of him in that context. So I want to transition to the whole area of Israel and the international world and Israel and diplomacy. And we saw Israel as being, Ben-Gurion saw Israel as being an example to all the other nations of the world. And, you know, he wrote about China and he visited Myanmar, he visited Burma, and he, you know, who did yoga and all sorts of other things. What do you think that Ben-Gurion would say about the most recent Abrahamic agreements and the whole fact that we now have diplomatic relations with the United Arab Emirates and with Morocco in this context?
I don't think I have anything to innovate here when I will say that I believe he would be thrilled. And maybe I'm just reflecting my own feelings because I am thrilled. I visited Dubai a year ago, and it was, you know, it felt like peace, you know. It's what makes this such a special, such a powerful event in my eyes, and as far as I can tell from Ben-Gurion's eyes, is that it felt to me when I visited there that this is really Israel reaching out to its region. Now, let's put it in that context for a minute, okay? Beyond the issues of the Arab world, okay? Let's talk about Israel in its immediate region. One of the things that Ben-Gurion was very much aware of and concerned of is that Israel is not connected enough to its immediate region. Ben-Gurion thought it's very artificial and not healthy for Israel to have relations only with Europe. The fact that Israel was mostly with its face to the Mediterranean, okay, facing the sea westward, right? Facing the west, and the west in its dual meaning, right? Europe and North America. Okay, Ben-Gurion did not think that that was good enough for Israel. And I want to refer to two main reasons. I want to, look, there's so much to say about this topic because first of all, it's a topic that I like. I have a special, I'm very much interested in this topic. It fascinates me personally, and we still have to study it more. But let me just say that I will concise it into two aspects. He believed that Israel has a lot to contribute to the immediate region, and that Israel he saw Israel as part, when I say the region, I mean Asia and Africa. Okay. Now, Asia and Africa, what they have in common with Israel is the fact that many states achieved independence after World War II, which means that many states were facing similar challenges of getting used to democracy and citizenship and sovereignty and dealing with social cohesion and economy. And Ben-Gurion believed that Israel has a lot to contribute from its own experience, but also a lot to share and exchange with the challenges that face nations vis-a-vis achieving independence and sovereignty in the 20th century. You know, in distinction from nations that achieved independence in the 18th and 19th century. It's like a different context. So Ben-Gurion believed very much that Israel has to be more integrated and engaged in that scene, in that political diplomatic scene. But there's also another aspect to that. And and it's important for me to emphasize it. If I want to follow Ben-Gurion's legacy, he believed that Judaism has can have a special common ground with the non-monotheistic civilizations of the East. And the reason is that, and again, I'm echoing him, okay? I'm talking Ben-Gurion through my voice and my words, but I'm representing him. He believed that the history that Judaism and Christianity has had creates some obstacles that will be very difficult to solve even after many, many generations. And he believed that, on the other hand, the non-monotheistic civilizations, okay, and religions, okay, with Buddhism or in general, not only the religions, but also the philosophies of the East, okay, as they are reflected in the Indian civilization and in the civilization of China. He believed that there is something, those obstacles don't exist. He believed that there could be a direct and mutually and an equal dialogue between Israel and those countries, because those loaded memories from the past do not exist. And that's why he would consider, the way I see it, I think he would consider the Abraham Accords as another achievement in that direction, beyond the issue of Israeli-Arab peace. It's about getting, looking eastward, as a metaphor, rather than looking westward. It's about reaching out to the region, being part of the region, and having a dialogue with civilizations that might have more things in common with Judaism, with the Jewish experience in general.
That's fascinating. I guess Ben-Gurion, like most young Israelis, would have packed a backpack and traveled throughout India for about 6 to 8 months.
I was in Burma for 10 days, And yes, he was there for a study. He was there because he wanted to get a better understanding of the philosophy and the civilization. And I agree that if he would have more time as a non-statesman, I mean, if he would be a private citizen, he would definitely go and travel in India, in Southeast Asia. He would talk to the people. In fact, he talked to the people. How did he talk with them? They sent him letters. You know, we have a letter from a taxi driver from Sri Lanka. Okay, and Ben-Gurion writes him back. I mean, and he writes to him, as a simple taxi driver from Sri Lanka, let me tell you this and that. And Ben-Gurion writes to him, no, there is no such thing as a simple taxi driver from Sri Lanka. I mean, you are very, and thank you for writing to me because it interests me what you have to say. You know, this is in a nutshell the correspondence between them, which gives you a sense of his, let's say, his authentic curiosity about the other cultures, the cultures that are in our immediate region, and that the importance it is for Israel to communicate and to have dialogues with those cultures.
Fantastic. Paula, thank you so much. As like you said at the beginning, we could have spent an hour and a half on each topic, but we're going to thank you and wish you a great Yom Ha'atzmaut, and I'll turn it over to Galit for the conclusion.
I'm just going to say that I think that was fascinating, and as you may have seen, I was taking tons of notes, even though I can listen to this afterwards. There is so much more for us to discuss, and I think that we should do another session in terms of looking forward to the countries that Israel does have baggage with, as opposed to those that it doesn't. But thank you very, very much. I want to wish you Chag Atzmaut Sameach, and to all of the people that are listening today, and to thank my colleague Simon for his perceptive questions, and turn the microphone back to Galit.
Very good. Thank you, David. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Simon. Another fascinating conversation. And it seems like there's never enough time, but that's the reason why we keep on doing these as well. And David, I want to say, I think we have to open a museum at your office and start charging because that's impressive, very impressive. To our viewers, we hope you enjoyed our coffee date today. If you would like to learn more about the work and research being conducted at BGU, please be sure to visit our website. It's www.bengurion.ca. And while you're on our website, you will be prompted to sign up for our newsletter to learn more as well. And you can also follow us on social media. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Coffee with Our Researchers. Happy Yom Ha'atzmaut, and bye for now.